Great. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the past, present, future of media buying. And it's been a lot of work and a lot of discussion about what is RTB and what is exchange buying. And the goal of this presentation is to really just sit back and give you guys a framework for understanding all the components in the space. Whether you're an agency or you're an advertiser or you're a publisher, you're going to have to be involved with RTB and exchange buying. And it's going to be important for you to understand how to do it and how to do it well. It's going to be part of the future agency business, and it'll be part of everyone's business going forward. So to understand the future, I always like to look back and understand where we've come from. And so we have to look really far back in media buying, because it actually was around 300 years ago. That's the example of Benjamin Franklin's magazine from the 1740s, the first magazine ad 300 years ago, the first newspaper ad in 1704 in the Boston Newsletter were sort of the first placements that were actually put into place. Another, sort of couple hundred years go by, and the media buying happened in radio, which was the next medium that really came into the advertising world. That allowed brands to reach a mass audience on a mass scale and do that in a very interesting way and creative way. In TV, obviously, in the 1950s, you could buy TV spots and you could do essentially demographic targeting and day parting by reaching women at home during the day with soap operas and soap opera content. And then in the 1990s, you had display ads. You had the first time where you could actually buy display ads. And if we look in the last 10 years, things have been accelerating faster and faster and faster, right? So you had Overture. Before that, you had GoTo essentially create the paid-for-performance marketplace. You had the ability to bid on keywords. And if you think about it, the keyword marketplace was actually one of the first exchanges in my mind. It's really just an exchange for buying user intent. And you did that through a medium, and that medium was actually a keyword at the time. So the keyword marketplace then evolved towards the content network. You had Google AdSense, and you had a self-serve system that you could access that marketplace and buy essentially content ads, and you could show those ads out on relevant content. And then in 2005, 2006, you had essentially the first exchanges come into the field, and that was potentially Right Media, AdECN, a few other exchanges, and you're doing this still all manually. We're not even talking about RTB yet. This is just essentially self-serve exchange buying. Then in 2008, 2009, that's when you saw RTB. RTB essentially came onto the scene as a feature of the major exchanges, allowing you to more effectively buy in those exchanges and to do it in a programmatic way. And so that brings us up until today, which essentially is a mix of exchanges and UI layers that allow you to programmatically trade in display and other types of media. So I've created 3 different categories for the businesses that we generally work with in the exchange space today. The first being a meta exchange, someone like an AppNexus, who essentially is providing you a UI onto multiple types of exchanges. You've got broad exchanges that are selling multiple media types like Google AdX, and so you can go there and find multiple kinds of media types on a single exchange. And then you've got verticalized exchanges. So these are exchanges like BRX or like Immobi for mobile. Essentially, by media type, you can only go onto these exchanges and buy one kind of media type. Overall, though, the media types that are covered are essentially the ones that we know today and have been sort of buying against manually over time. So pre-roll, display, rich media, search, mobile is essentially all available through some kind of exchange interface today. Not all are totally RTB enabled, but it's coming and it'll eventually get there pretty quickly. So, there we go. So to understand how media buying is being done today, there's really 3 kinds of media buying, and I always like to kind of remind people that actually most of the media buying done today is truly manual. I mean, it really has a lot to do with picking up the phone, calling your publishers that you have relationships with, saying, what's your rate card? How much are you willing to sell it for? I'm going to send you a fruit basket. Give me a good price. Emailing tags back and forth. And if you can believe it, actually, there's a lot of back and forth today, even through fax. I mean, you get the IOs through fax, you get POs. There's a sort of like, it's almost like manual time bidding I mean, it's this unbelievable analog sort of world that we're sort of living in, where you're still, emailing tags back and forth, et cetera. So that's where most of the money is still actually being bought and sold right now. Exchanges in the middle, so that was really a progression in the need for big buyers to move away from just buying home pages and sponsorship takeovers to now buying audiences, demographics, behavioral audience groups, and being able to say, you know what, I'm not just going to buy contextually a home page, I'm going to buy an audience. And so, they were able to do that manually through the exchanges. But then to do that at scale was even harder. And then to pay per impression or per bid was basically impossible, right? So that's where RTB came in. RTB actually is the smallest amount of money going through the industry in terms of media buying right now, but it has the greatest potential. So through RTB, you actually can buy users, you're buying cookies, you're buying specific actual impressions, right? Opportunities to market to people. So just to keep this in perspective, what we see is that within the total spend of advertising in the US, which is about $160 billion, only $26 billion of that is online. These are 2010, 2011 numbers, right? And so it's only 17, 18%. Within online, only about $1.4 billion of that is actually running through the exchanges right now. And then estimated within the exchanges, only about half of that, $800 million, is actually RTB enabled. And so you have to kind of keep everything in perspective as we talk about this. This is a nascent sort of industry and technology, and so it is a bit of the wild, wild west, but in that is a huge amount of opportunity. So you might have heard sort of, if we look at the graph on the right, sort of people call RTB race to the bottom, and it's, it's only poor inventory that's out there. Well, that might have been true 3 years ago, but it's probably not true today. And if we look at kind of what the average CPM is for RTB in this space, it's gone from, call it 25, 33 cents to maybe $1.25, $1.35. So that, if you look at that curve up and to the right, as more and more premium inventory comes into RTB-enabled exchanges and people are willing to pay more for it and more demand's available and the marketplaces become more liquid, that's only going to go up and to the right. And so suddenly you're now talking maybe $2, $3, $5 in a very short order amount of time. So just to kind of step back for a second, I wanted to kind of throw out there, how agencies think about media planning today. There was a day in which sort of you look at ComScore, or you look at some of the measurement companies, and you sort of picked out, okay, I'm going to pick a set of ad networks, I'm going to pick some direct publishers, I'm going to pick an exchange, I'm going to buy across all of them, I'm going to figure out what works. And so I'm wondering if maybe the agencies are going to be looking at a new set of metrics in the near future. Because realistically, if you're efficient at using RTB, the number of impressions you're actually buying against, your actual sort of unique reach, might actually go down. So you might not actually want to look at the guy that's at the top of the list. You actually just want to look at the guy that's most efficient with your money. So you're going to need a new set of metrics to understand that. You're going to need to know what's your win rate, for example. How much of the query feed are you taking from the RTB exchanges? I don't know what these metrics are yet, but I'd love to sort of challenge the industry and sort of figure out, what are those metrics for evaluating buyers and sellers on RTB-enabled inventory, right? So just something to think about. So what's so different about, RTB media buying and manual media buying? I mean, like I mentioned before today, today is this world where you're essentially picking up the phone, you're negotiating a price. A lot of times it's based on either your relationship with someone or how much you've spent in the past, what your volume discount is, what kind of advertisers you're bringing to the table. And it's a lot of art and not as much science as you'd think. And that sort of analog world of passing back and forth tags, testing things before they're live, it creates a huge amount of overhead in the system. In the world of programmatic buying, basically everything is set up for you from day one. Because all the publisher inventory is enabled, all of the billing, the PO process, everything's already in place, and you show up using a programmatic front end to actually do the buying. And so suddenly now everything is doing the work sort of within the system and within a framework, using technology to make those decisions, and you're basically doing the analytics and pulling the levers to sort of make your choices and win bids. And so it's a much more efficient way of actually moving media back and forth. So we wanted to get a little bit deeper into the weeds, and so talking to Joe, we wanted to look at a little bit more around what was going on under the hood with RTB. And so very quickly, in terms of understanding the technology stack of RTB and understanding kind of what's going on in terms of a barrier to getting into this business and doing it directly. This is the basic workflow of a direct integration with one of the major exchanges. You essentially have to build up a cookie pool and a mapping to sort of their IDs, and you have to build that and maintain that in some kind of profile store so that you can maintain and find those cookies on their exchanges. Once you receive a bid request for them, you actually have to then match your campaigns in an intelligent way, look at what constraints are, what those goals are of those campaigns. Are they geo-targeted? Do they have other kinds of constraints? And then you've got to figure out how much you're going to actually bid for that actual cookie or that campaign, right? And then you're going to win or lose, and then you're going to write all that information about what you learned about that bid request back into your data warehouse so that your bidding algorithms can learn about it and get better the next time, right? If you win, you're going to actually then have to serve the ads, and you're going to actually then track what happens once the ads are live, right? All of this happens, sort of call it in 50 milliseconds, which, to give everybody kind of a metric for that, that's basically a blink of a human eye, somewhere between 20 and 50 milliseconds. And then you're going to do this billions of times a day. So there's a pretty high technical overhead to doing this, right? And it's not that easy to do it directly, which is why a lot of companies and agencies are using vendors and using third parties to do it. Because the technology stack and the CapEx from both a business perspective is pretty high right now. So in the middle there you have the technology stack, and essentially you've got these major pieces. You probably have some kind of profile store, profile server. You've got really fast connections through multiple colos potentially in the United States interacting with the actual exchange colos. You definitely have an ad server. You have an optimization algorithm. You probably really need a bid algorithm as well. And then, of course, you're going to have some kind of data warehouse. So you've got a pretty significant technology overhead to get going if you're doing this directly or on your own. And then once you've done the technology component, you got to have the actual demand as well. So you need dollars coming in to create that demand to allow you to actually spend it. And then you've got to do it not just once with sort of, let's say, Google AdX, but then you might want to do it with 3, 4, 5, or 6 other exchanges. So pretty high overhead to doing this, but pretty huge opportunity if you do it. So how does this change the world? So now that we kind of understand the present and how technically, basically this works, how does this change the world? So if you're an agency, you need to probably rethink the way you've been doing media planning and media buying in the past, because it's going to be extremely analytical. It's not going to be as much understanding, where these publishers are, where these audiences are. It's going to be extremely driven around where you're going to win bids, what the opportunity is for reaching a certain set of consumers, who your advertisers' consumers actually are, and how you get access to them. On the advertiser side, they're going to be pressuring you as an agency and saying, great, this is so much more efficient, now I want better pricing, right? So, but at the end of the day, that's going to be beneficial to them, it's going to be beneficial to you, right? And then on the publisher side, you're going to have to think about this from a direct sales standpoint. So your direct sales force, on average may have 20%, 30% is the industry average sell-through. And so direct sales force that may be very good at selling tier 1 custom inventory, top of the pyramid, are going to need to also understand how to sell or compete against the algorithm that's selling tier 2 plus everything else, whatever that is, right? And then ad networks, of course, are going to be integrated with these exchanges, and they're going to have a seat at the table and make sure that they're available to bring new media types as they get new inventory into the system, both from a demand and a supply side. So I wanted to quickly stop for a minute and just say, all right, so now we understand RTB and we understand how that's going to affect everyone in the space. I wanted to just take, this is the Luma chart, that Terrence did, obviously, and I've taken all the logos off of it. And I wanted to kind of just sort of sit back for a second and breathe, first of all, right? It's a lot easier to see and understand and kind of think through. And then actually sort of say, all right, now that RTB is in this world, how does that change everything that's going to happen over the next 3 to 4 years in our industry? And so I'm going to talk sort of quickly, and I think there's going to be some sound that comes on. And we're going to see, my prediction for sort of what happens over the next, 3 years in this space. So I think trading desks are going to kind of beat up ad networks and bring flowers when they do it. I think the ad exchanges are going to absorb the DSPs, maybe merge them into the trading desks as well. I'm not sure DSPs are around as they're called today. Performance networks are going to evolve, maybe go after advertisers directly. That probably fragments some of the advertisers to go directly to the exchanges, but most of them will stay with agencies. I think the ad exchanges are then going to go on a buying spree and start buying up all of those value-added service providers that are just providing features on our industry, maybe not having separate business units. And then that'll heat up the war with Facebook, probably won't use tanks. That'll have an alternative platform on this side of the equation. The media planning companies will slowly bring in TV dollars over into the space online.
Dun, 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 dun.
Verification will be around protecting the brands for a while. And then, of course, the analytics and ad serving companies may start giving away RTB capabilities for free as long as you participate in their exchanges. The performance networks will then evolve also to make sure that they're providing support like Adconion is in terms of providing performance to the agencies and then bringing new media types like smart TV inventory, like email inventory, et cetera. And so if we think about RTB evolving this space and we look at what it looks like in 2015, really there's been a tremendous amount of consolidation in the space. And if you put it all back together, what you realize is the center of our ecosystem in 2015 is the exchange, and it is features like RTB that are really going to make a lot of dollars flow through this system. So the joke that we heard, during the upfronts, and I think, in the past couple conferences, is it's easier to spend $1 billion on TV than it is to spend $100,000 online. It's kind of sad, right? It's true, right? Or it's not sad, and it's okay. But at the end of the day, having RTB in place is going to allow that money to move through this ecosystem in an extremely efficient, extremely effective way. And so this is when you'll be able to see that $1 billion, those $1 billion move through the system in a way that makes a lot of sense. So if we take one more sort of step at this and we look, all right, what is this going to look like maybe in 2020? This is sort of my take on what RTB and the exchange world looks like in 2020. So on the left-hand side of the equation, you'll have agencies and advertisers accessing a one-click technology stack that'll be feeding in RTB-driven information into their data platforms. They'll be able to look at that information and actually do all kinds of different creative, multivariate creative testing as they start winning and losing different types of bids at different types of creatives across multiple exchanges. Okay? And that center box will be a marketplace driven by the exchanges, and you'll have associated with RTB, you'll have attribution modeling. You'll have some kind of standard attribution model that people have agreed to that's been put out there either by a standards body or a group of agencies that get together, and they'll be able to actually run a standard attribution model on your campaign. As an agency, you'll also be able to bring custom attribution models that you've developed on your own and created by running all of this RTB inventory. So it'll be a very interesting thing to do to be able to test both standard and custom attribution models. On the right-hand side, you'll have publishers. So I'm not sure Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 exists anymore in the publisher space. I think basically, essentially, you probably have Tier 1, and that's what the direct sales force is focused on the publisher side. And then everything else is going to be algorithmic. Everything else will be bidded dynamically and yield managed across multiple exchanges, right? Both of those publishers, or all the publishers, will be able to obviously access some kind of yield management platform and ad operation systems as well to help manage their inventory. The third constituent I think that's most important, though, that's missing from the conversation today are content owners. Content owners are going to be very interested in the exchange world of the future. iTunes is an exchange. Simple as that. We have to broaden the way we think about exchanges. It's not just for ad people anymore. And so when you look at the TV, the movie studio, professional video, even the gaming industry, that content is going to be maintained inside of a cloud, and there's simply going to be syndication preferences set against that content. And content owners are going to enable that inventory to be able to be syndicated by a centralized exchange. So it's going to be brand safe. They're going to get some kind of rev share. They're going to be able to say, okay, you can take my content and show it as long as I get 50 cents every time it's played. No problem, right? And I can guarantee that it's done in a brand safe way. Okay, so the marketplace will have access to all of this content instead of just being able to match ads. And then there's the fourth constituent to the ecosystem of the future that I think is very important, and those are the users. So I think users will be able to directly influence that marketplace and that exchange by providing some type of information about themselves and about what kind of advertising that they'd like to see. So for example, in the US today, it's something like 10,000 brand images are hit, average US consumer a year. So imagine a system here where there's actually someone that may log into their Facebook profile and enable 4 or 5 different check boxes that say, you know what, I'm willing to share these 4 things with advertisers about myself. My age, my gender, and even I might even tell you that I'm in market for a new car, for example, right? And there'll be some kind of value exchange between the users and the actual marketers. And the centralized marketplace for that exchange will be able to take all 4 constituents. So we'll take that content dynamically, place it into the publisher pages that it's going to be available on based on what it knows about the user, and then dynamically insert the advertising in real time, and then offer that advertising opportunity to us within 50 milliseconds to be able to bid on it. And so it's going to be an exciting new world, and Adconion Media Group is looking forward to partner with you to make sure we can get you there, and thank you for having me. Here's moving premium inventory onto the exchanges. So from my perspective, the publishers are going to do some very simple analysis. They're going to sit there and they're going to go, how much does it cost to maintain a fully staffed sales team that's going to have some X percentage of sell-through at some blended rate that I can get? They're going to sell that amount of inventory. I'm going to compare that to what I can get across verticalized, broad, and meta exchanges, and I'm going to run my cost-benefit analysis, and that's how I'm going to run my business. So at some point, the reticence and the noise sort of fall away to the math, and I think I'm going to be pragmatic to the math and sort of let publishers sort of decide when that right moment is, and then the floodgates are going to open. I think part of it is that RTB didn't have the liquidity in the marketplace, they didn't have the demand, they didn't have the big dollars, so publishers, rightly so, may have held back a bit. And so, but I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see that sort of the economics make a lot more and more sense, and then continually sort of evaluate that, and more inventory come into the exchanges.
You also mentioned as part of your chart, you were also among the first today to mention the need for, at some point, some sort of association to come in and impose some sort of standards. And it seems to me that it's one of the things that we heard, at least in background in a lot of the discussions this morning, was the need, especially as we move towards cross-channel uses of these technologies, but also just the terminology and definitions, that somebody has to come in here and start standardizing this stuff so that it becomes easier for everybody to understand.
Yeah, I mean, TV has been working across a standardized model for 50 years. So, they're able to figure it out and have a $60 billion ad marketplace every year. So it makes sense that, in terms of online, with all the data that we have access to, that everyone can take a look at. I just don't think anyone's really put the stake in the ground and said, this is how attribution modeling is going to work, for better or for worse. This is how a GRP system is going to work. And I'm just waiting to see that consortium of people, probably a combination of technology vendors and agencies, get together and put the flag in the ground and put it out to the industry. I'd love to see it.
Why not the existing associations?
Why don't they?
They
should.
We've had them in place for about a decade.
Right.
Ben Fox, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.